It's one thing to listen to doom and gloom about food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation. It's quite another thing to hear practical, immediately actionable advice from experts who can help you reduce the fear, anxiety, and burden of these problems. Tune in now to the Surviving Hard Times podcast from the Finding Genius Foundation with Richard Jacobs. Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out, and I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide, that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on Current Initiatives. And now, to our guest. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Surviving Hard Times podcast, sponsored by the Finding Genius Foundation.
I have Christy Darlington. Her website is greenlivingoffgrid.com. So we had to talk to her about her work being off-grid, but primarily she knows quite a bit about hydroponics. So I wanted to ask her about that. So Christy, thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about your journey. What first gave you the idea that you wanted to live off-grid?
Well, I've always had kind of an interest in being self-sufficient and providing for myself in case of, emergencies and things like that. So I got into this originally, it was just gardening. I was out, I've gone through a divorce, so I don't have the property anymore, but we had 5 acres on the county line of, Colorado Springs area. And so we were at 7,500 feet. And so we had a lot of, I try to do a lot of gardens out there with 5 acres. You've got lots of room to try different things. We had a well, pretty fun. I mean, we could have farm animals and different things like that too. And so I was like, well, let's just see what we can do to innovate, to, provide for ourselves. At that time, we were going through, I got married soon. And soon after I got married, there was that 2008 economic crash and a lot of folks were out of work. We were okay with our jobs, but there were other factors that I just thought, let's just be a little bit more creative and see what we can do because we got the land. Let's, be resourceful. So I started with the gardens. I tried to grow some tomatoes outdoors and, kind of your standard plants out there with beans and a few things, potatoes and all. I've discovered that with 7,500 feet, you got harsh conditions here in Colorado. We would get snow as early as sometimes even really the end of August, but usually like middle of September, you can count on some snow, frost or something coming. And then we would get snowstorms as late as the end of May. In fact, just a couple of years ago, we had 21 inches of snowfall on May 20th, I think it was. And then just this year, we had another big, huge storm come in and it was wrecking my garden because I would try to start my plants outdoors and get something growing and it would be wrecked by the snow. And so then we got a greenhouse and we put that up. And with the greenhouse, I discovered, again, Colorado, with us being so high in altitude, we had intense sun. And that sun would dry my garden beds out. I had an incredibly difficult time keeping water levels the right ratio when it comes to tomato plants and things I was trying to grow in my greenhouse. And then I learned about hydroponics and aquaponics. With aquaponics, that is a form of growing plants with water and nutrients from the fish. So essentially what aquaponics does is your fish provide the nutrients for your plants and you run that fish water through the garden beds And the garden beds would take up the nitrates from the fish water and return the water to the fish tank. So in a perfectly balanced system, you wouldn't have to add additional nutrients, conceivably, if you have a good enough fish load and it's balanced between that and your plants. Now, I had some issues. I tried the aquaponics the first year. I had some fish loss because I didn't know how to regulate that balance. And so it's a small system because my greenhouse was 10 feet by 8 feet. So it's a small system, nothing like, you watch those videos that people do it professionally. They've got these massively huge greenhouses, and I did it on a budget. So I had a small little greenhouse and a little goldfish. I didn't run tilapia. And there were other conditions.
You did aquaponics with goldfish?
Yes, with goldfish. And they're one of the better fish for a small system because they are more stable. They can handle fluctuations in the balance, the pH balance. And we had well water coming in at about 8.0 pH, which is a little bit high. You like to have it down around 7, and it would come in at 8. And I tried to adjust some of the pH, but it's a very difficult thing to adjust because depending on how your plants are taking out the water and the nitrates, it could throw a lot of balance off. And so pH adjustment was just not doable for me. But doing it with goldfish, these guys did really well with the well water. And
that's pretty cool.
Wow.
Good innovation. What happens
in
the hydroponics? I was just thinking, aquaponics. So, as the plants go through, like from vegetative to, let's say, fruiting stage, or, I would think they would draw different nutrients out of the water. So wouldn't the fish get water that changes over time as the plants eat different things out of it?
That could be, but see, that's part of the issue. The other issue you have is, as your system grows and mature and your fish grow, you get a lot more waste, and that waste affects the quality of the water. So I discovered in my small system, I had to do frequent water changes, and I would run that water out to my garden beds, which just helped my garden beds grow well. In fact, between the horses and the horse manure I would do with my organic gardening outside and my fish water, I pretty much didn't have to add any amenities to the soil on that side of it. But with the fish tanks, I had to be cleaning, pretty regularly. Every couple months, all the filters had to be taken out and cleaned. I ran this with sponge filters. So I wasn't using charcoal filtration, all the fancy stuff that people use. Typically with aquaponics, it relies on the hydroton, which are hydroton beds. They have clay pellets, and clay is considered the most pH neutral substrate that you can use for your garden beds. If you put just regular rock in, the rock has its own minerals that it adds to the water that can kill and poison your fish. And a lot of people that if they're novice and they're starting aquaponics and they just get the cheapest stuff they get at the rock supply store, that is not the way to go. Especially if you don't know what that rock's going to do, it's really recommended to go with the clay pellets. So that's what I used. But I also discovered over time, again, that water's running out of the fish tank, and you're also dealing with, your pumps can't pick up everything from the base of your fish tanks, so you get the poop that it collects up and breaks down. And so you just have to do a lot of cleaning. That's what I discovered. Again, then my system was small. If someone's going to run a bigger system, I do not know how they clean everything out. I would typically start my aquaponics because, again, I tried heating through the winter. We get down to negative 10 degrees in the wintertime, and my greenhouse had an R rating of 3. So you can imagine my cost in trying to run my plants in the winter and keep that temperature up. Electrical heaters, forget that. That wasn't working. I ran some gas heaters, those little propane heaters. They worked pretty good up through right about November. I had to close it down. And also it got to the point where I couldn't produce enough to justify my costs in the heating with the propane. So I typically would only maybe run it another month after. About August, I would start to pack some things up, clean out the trays. And then in September, that's when I would, try to finish up the rest of the growing in the greenhouse. And over winter, just a lot of water changes, clean out those sponge filters. And I use the sponge filters in the tank to kind of provide a second form of biofiltration, and it's where I didn't have to solely rely on my hydrogen clay pellet beds, for the garden. So that's how I handled the difficult, harsh conditions of growing here in Colorado, where I could winterize and still keep my fish alive through the winter. So yeah, that's kind of what I learned. The other thing I learned too, with my hydroponic setup, I discovered, again, I only had like 4 or 5 goldfish per 85-gallon tank, and they did great handling all of the green plants, like my lettuce. I did some herbs and different things. If it was a bigger plant that required fruit, I ended up adding additional hydroponic supplements just to get that extra boost for the fruiting plants. And so I ended up breaking my upper shelf hydroponic system separate from the fish tank. I used the fish water as a base, and I would change that water out every couple of weeks, or the plants, as they got larger, would use up that water. And then I would just add new fish water every week, and then I would add nutrients about once a month. It cut my nutrient costs significantly, but it also gave those tomato plants what they needed, the additional support, because my system was too small to handle the fruiting and to get the flow what was needed if I was to try to run those with my.
Well, going back to hydroponics, why not do just a greenhouse and grow them on soil inside a greenhouse? What made you go to hydroponics? What kind of system do you have?
So I started with the soil option, and the biggest issue I had was the dryness here in Colorado. I really could not keep my lettuce beds hydrated well enough with those small trays that I had on my shelf. They would dry out even if I was watering every day. I spent 20 minutes a day watering. It was incredibly labor intensive. Whereas when I went to the aquaponics and I ran that water through for the lettuce and the bean trays and everything, I ran that through on a timer, and it took care of itself. In fact, my beans and my lettuce never had to be I never had to add nutrients to it. I would set the timer up, and aside from cleaning my fish tanks every couple of weeks, I would, change the water out. Aside from that, and maybe adding some, supplements to the fish tank to help keep it balanced, I didn't have to do hardly anything with that part of the greenhouse. Everything would grow, and I'd get great lettuce heads, great beans, great production. And I could go on a camping trip for a week and be gone, and no problem. As long as the fish had some food, somebody feeding them, or my feeders were going, they were fine while I was gone. So it definitely freed up my time. And that was probably one of the biggest factors. The other factor was, again, dealing with those, there were 2 issues. I had to add supplements to the soil beds so that things would grow. You couldn't just continue to grow on the same soil every year. I had another problem with gnats. If you run a lot of water inside soil beds in a greenhouse, unless you're buying high quality soil, which is incredibly expensive, and you change out your soil every year, you're going to have gnat problems. I used to put diatomaceous earth to try to keep the gnats down, because in a greenhouse, they're protected from predators. So you don't have the natural things you have outside, natural amenities. Well, you've got your ladybugs outside, you've got your birds and all of those prey that keep down the aphids and keep down the worms and all the other stuff that you get in your garden beds. So I discovered with aquaponics, it was much cleaner. I didn't have nearly the trouble with the pests. And if I did get an infestation with some worms and stuff, my fish like to eat worms. So I just go out there and inspect the plants and throw those worms. Cutworms would like to come in there. I would throw them into the tank, and my fish would take care of them. So it was a much cleaner system. And I just love the time freedom of having things automatically.
Okay, so again, hydroponics. What have you seen the trade-offs are between that and growing in soil? And your hydroponic system, is it flood and drain, or how do you get the water to the plants and move it around?
Okay, so I have a couple systems. So the greenhouse system was pretty much your flood and drain. I kind of did a lot of cracky, where with lettuce, it doesn't need a huge amount of water flow and air to keep them aerated. And you could, as long as you have a bit of space between the water and the base of your net cups, So it's about a 1/4 inch or so. Your plants do pretty good with, like lettuce did really good. My beans did great. Some of the herbs don't do well with that kind of system. I had to have more of a aeroponic system, and I built something like that for my herbs. But in my greenhouse, is pretty much that. They would, the water would come in and then it would drain out, and I was able to maintain my plants that way. But indoors in my house, I actually have strictly cracky hydroponics in my house. I don't even have to run aerators. It's all lettuce, and I grow that all year round in kind of a shelving unit. And so that I add nutrients. It's very simple. And what's the trade-off? Again, I don't have gnats. I don't have to buy high quality soil. I don't have to add additional, going to the store and pay for all those extra amenities that you add to soil. It is as simple as filling my tray about halfway. I add my nutrients when I start it. Maxi grows really great for lettuce. And then as the plant drinks down the water and the nutrients, it provides its own air gap that is needed for the roots. And so in 2 months of growing, I've got these huge heads, and I can just cycle, through those trays. It's easy to clean out. I don't have to deal with soil. I just rinse everything out and start it all again. So it's a piece of cake. I love hydroponics, especially indoors. If you don't want to mess with fish, you just have an apartment, you can even set this up in a closet. And I've got all kinds of systems I built. My Green Living Off Grid website. I show you different things that I've done. There's floating raft system you can do. You can put something in a bin, put some plant lights on the side, and even use a peanut butter jar as your, jar for holding the roots of your tomato plants and start, planting that. So I've really enjoyed that. I've cloned roots for like tomatoes, just use tomato starts. I've cloned those inside, and cloning is, you can use an aerated water, and you cut those stems off the mature plant and stick that into your hydroponics and start your plants that way. I did a lot of that setup as well with my beans. So to get a jump on my greenhouse garden, I would start all of that indoors and then put them outside when I was ready to grow for the summer. And again, my plants, like the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics and the way your plants grow, there's so much more growth to them. They get bigger, larger. And of course, my fruit, it's great off of the plants. That you just can't control those nutrients in that ratio as well with soil.
Well, okay, in soil though, the soil itself, has the microbiome there, the roots of the plant. I would think it would be a lot more self-sustaining than liquid, than water with nutrients in it. But you said you found hydroponics to be more robust?
Actually, you make a really good point. There are certain plants that do awesome in hydroponics. But when it comes to larger plants, exactly what you're saying there are certain plants that I grow outdoors in my garden that I will not attempt in hydroponics. I did, in fact, try some, and they just don't do as well when they don't have the soil provides a level of stability in your pH that is harder to maintain in hydroponics. So I discovered, like for squash example, if you try to grow squash in hydroponics, those roots, the plants can get nice and large, but when they go to the fruiting stage, you can have root rot, you can have difficulty with, you could tell the pH imbalance. So I've had issues with some of those plants when I tried them in hydroponics, and you'll get the brown spots, which show imbalance in the hydroponic nutrients. And then how do you change that water out when it is such a large plant? You can't just pick it up and change it out easily. Pick it up out of the container. You've got the roots and all of that built into either, some people grow in perlite or they grow it all in clay pellets. That's a mess to clean out, by the way. You got a big plant with lots of roots in that. Oh my gosh, that's a mess. And in my system, I only grow strictly the smaller plants, and except in my greenhouse, because I had difficulty outside in my gardens because of the harsh weather. I did grow tomatoes out in my greenhouse with the hydroponics, and that worked pretty well. But trying to do squash, I wouldn't even attempt it. It's just too difficult. Now, there may be some people that have successfully work maybe a flood and drain system, larger beds. I've seen it done with aquaponics that are huge systems, but with my small system, I wasn't able to create that kind of water flow and that nutrient flow and have large enough fish load to provide all of that. So I can't really say, for comparison's sake, that I can comment on what a large scale aquaponics or hydroponic system would do with large plants. I will tell you that my experience with tomatoes, my first year, I tried strictly hydroponics. I didn't have fish, and I went through a lot of money on hydroponic nutrients that I did not get back from my crop. So my experience has been, if I didn't have the fish water, I couldn't make it financially feasible to maintain the large plants on hydroponics.
Did you recirculate the water in hydroponics, or did you just have it as a flow through system? Or
so originally, yeah, I tried that, but again, the roots got so large in my tomato plants that trying to get it to flow out and get new water in was really tough. Now, again, I was using deep water culture. So that's where your roots go down into the water. You have your aerators. And I struggled with not being able to get it to flow out through my garden hose and all that. It would drain so slow, and it was very difficult to get anything automatic that way. So I did a lot of manual, and when I did dump the water out of there, I would let it drain as naturally as I could. And then I would add in my fish water, but I couldn't get it. People with larger systems can probably manage this a lot better, but I personally had trouble because the roots would get so large, and then it would.
Well, have you ever tried a flood and drain system? You have plants sit in pots inside a reservoir, and then there's a reservoir down below, and it floods it for like 2 minutes every 2 hours and drains it out.
Right.
That might be a more workable system. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that would require an entire lot larger bed, hydroton. And I was using net pots with small little bit of hydroton. I tried some smaller pots with the hydroton, but what I discovered, if you don't clean that hydroton out, it would get, rotting, and then it would cause toxins to build up in the fish tank. So every year would clean everything out. I would rinse everything out. And I discovered cleaning hydroton, especially when you're talking large amounts, is a lot of work. It's very difficult. And my experience, again, this is just mine, is that it wasn't worth the time that I was putting in to try to maintain that. So I never did those huge beds you see on some of those, you go to some of the channels where they have large hydroponic and aquaponic beds that are flood and drain. I never had anything that large to work with.
What is hydroton, by the way?
So that's the clay pellets I was talking about earlier. The
brand name.
Yeah, and I just had a small amount in my trays because, again, I discovered that it's just hard to maintain that amount of hydroton and keep it clean for my fish. So, and even if you don't do it for your fish, it gets a sludge on at the bottom of it. That was my.
You found you were unable to affordably run hydroponics. You have to do aquaponics to make it work.
Yes, yeah, definitely. The fish water, that provided the base. I only had to add nutrients once a month, whereas before, during the summer, and we're talking 4-month growing season. So once a month before, I was having to add nutrients every week to 2 weeks, trying to, keep up with the plants as they were growing. And so my hydroponic cost was probably double to triple what it was once I went to aquaponics and started using that as my primary nutrient source for the plants.
Well, since you have 5 acres, how come you haven't done a bigger greenhouse or like an in-ground, like a sunken greenhouse to control temperature better? Or
yeah,
are you just, is it money, or you don't want to go crazy and make it a huge operation?
Well, there's a lot of factors with that. First of all, my now ex worked a full-time job, and he was not interested in gardening. So if you go with a large-scale operation, there's more time involved in that to try to recoup your costs. And he didn't want to put a lot of money into something large. And we actually boarded horses on the property. So that brought in more money, a lot less work. And so we were using the land for other things, not just garden. I had an area, around the house that I could use for gardening. I had like 9 garden beds. Well, actually more than that, probably more like 10. And then I had the greenhouse, and he was like, let's just do this, hobby style. So that's really what we did. And it was more, he didn't want to put money out to go that large scale, to go professional. And again, that would require that being my job versus the other job that I have. So, and it was always risky because are we going to be successful at this? If you're going to actually start at that scale, you need to be, the mindset is this is going to be a business. And then we weren't at that place where we wanted to do it at that level. So I'm more like on the hobby side, and I'm more kind of like, I like to do the gardens that anybody can do anywhere. So even though not everybody can have a greenhouse, they can grow things inside their homes. And these lettuce trays are just awesome. They're so simple. Anybody can do that.
So are you selling some or all of your products? Is that how you're approaching it, or is this more for just personal use with friends? You'll eat some, they'll eat some.
Yeah, well, I use it personally. I do not do this as a business. I have some friends, and I actually been giving away lettuce. It's more like what I do. Just it's what I enjoy. But the money aspect, the only thing that I am selling is my training course on how to build the systems that I've developed. I've an aeroponic, simple, how to put this in like a 5-gallon bucket. It's a very simple thing that people can do with products you can get at Walmart and Home Depot and Amazon. And so I show people how to be a little more self-sufficient, make their own gardens. And like I said, you can put it in a closet. This can go anywhere in your home. And it can be a system that does not require a lot of your time.
That's cool. You call it the Darlington method or Christyponics or something?
Well, if you go to Green Living Off Grid, you'll see my video courses. So I have everything from, how to just grow an organic garden and how to set up a watering system makes it easier. So you don't have to spend a lot of time watering. And I did that out there on our property. And so I feature that in one of my video courses. The other one is I have 2 different hydroponic courses. One's called Simple Hydroponics, and it's how you do the lettuce grow trays inside a grow shelf unit that you can put in your house. And that's very simple, deep. It's just mostly using crack key method, which does not use aeration. The second one is advanced hydroponics. That's where I actually show you how to create like a flood and drain tower to grow your plants in hydrogen. But it's just something small. Again, you could put it in your house or have it on your patio. And it's a little more advanced because it requires pumps and aeration. And so the more like deep water culture requires aeration, I show you how to create your own aeration grid inside of a little 5-gallon bucket or a tote you can pick up at Walmart. So it's really simple. How can you start with a simple system? And the idea is, again, when you're not using soil, you don't want to deal with the pests that come from soil. That's where this method shines, because you can have it in your house and you're not going to have gnats flying all over. I tried the soil in the house the first year, and my ex, he was like, all these gnats everywhere. And I'm like, yeah. And I tried diatomaceous earth. It helped, but it wouldn't take care of everything. And he didn't like the gnats. So we started the hydroponics, and he's like, okay, I can live with that. This is okay. So
that makes sense. Okay. Well, very good, Chrissy. So people can go to your website. So what is it again? Green Living Off Grid?
Yep, greenlivingoffgrid.com. And they can kind of see a view of the different video courses that I have. My 4th level of membership provides access to everything, including the house system that I developed. I show you how to do something if you want to do something on a larger scale. But really just, you could start small with organic gardening and work your way up and just kind of see what fits your lifestyle.
Very cool. Well, Christy, thanks for coming on the podcast and talking about, not just the good parts, but the tough parts for you. I think it's very instructive. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed the interview. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Before you stop listening, ask yourself, what are 1 or 2 useful things you heard on this podcast that can help you overcome food and fertilizer shortages, skyrocketing prices, the cost of living, or your job being outsourced overseas or eliminated due to automation? Please like and subscribe and tell your friends and family about their Surviving Hard Times podcast. We're all going to need help now and in the near future.